Did you realize that in the latest Barbie movie with Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling, actually you can find a nice contrast between an ESFP and an ESFJ? If you want to know more about this, my thoughts on the types of Barbie and Ken in the movie, then just keep watching this video. Welcome to Type Evolution. I'm Olympia, and here it's all about personality types, personal evolution, and the matchmaking, you could say, between personality types. Before we go into the types of fictional characters, I want to make this disclaimer that fictional characters, because they are maybe not purely, but they are mainly human constructs, someone came up with them, they are not always consistent. So the problem is you should not rely too much on the typings of fictional characters in real life. Because sometimes in movies or series, a fictional character can even have a mix of different personality types, which you won't encounter in real life. People in real life, even though they might have sort of contradictory traits in quotation marks, typically they do fall into a specific personality type. And of course, also, this is just my opinion. There's no like official typing of these characters. Everyone has their own opinion on those typings. This is just my typing and my insights, also based on how I synthesize certain theories, especially like in this case Jungian theories, the 16 personality types. My take on ESFP or ESFJ is not just the cookie cutter version that you might find online that is very simplistic. I do include functions. I include also something called information elements from socionics. I include intertype relations from socionics, and just my own observations and my own conclusions. This video might contain some spoilers. I think it is best if you first go watch the movie. It is a good movie, though I think it might aggravate some dudes. It is not the most flattering when it comes to guys, I have to say. So I think it's best if you're a girl and you just go with your girlfriends. I mean, you can also watch it as a guy, of course. It's still a good movie. It's still fun. So yeah. But yeah, I would advise you to first watch the movie and then watch this video, but you can go either way. I think I'm probably gonna do some kind of spoiler alert or whatever if I go into spoilers. So I think before I can really go into the typing, just a little bit of a background in terms of what's going on in the movie, especially if you haven't seen it, and just as a refresher. So it starts off with Barbie in Barbie Land, and of course Ken also in Barbie Land, and there's like many different Barbies in that Barbie Land. I am just focusing on the main character played by Margot Robbie, which is what they are calling the stereotypical Barbie. And she's just going through her life in her Barbie dream house, just going around in the dream world, you could say. And eventually she starts noticing certain changes. So she starts noticing that her pointy feet become flat, that the water in her shower, quote unquote the water, there's not actually true water coming out, but you know, turning cold. Her food is burning, and what else? Oh, and she starts thinking about death. Whereas Ken, the focal point with Ken is more like, yeah, Ken is kind of the shadow. He's kind of always after Barbie in a way. He's just number two, basically. He's not really number one like Barbie, and he's really trying his best to get her affections and to kind of show off, but it's not really working. This is more or less the general gist, and then later on it goes more into the spoiler section. I think that Barbie is an ESFJ in this movie, and here are like some of my pointers towards that. Barbie is clearly an extrovert. I mean, EF extroverts, those who are extroverted and quote-unquote feeling types, they are oftentimes obviously extroverts, not always, but yeah, she's just going around saying, "Hey Barbie," like to everyone, just basically exuding extroverted feeling. Extroverted feeling is the first function for ESFJ and also ENFJ. I was going back and forth a little bit with those two types, to be honest, but I really settled on ESFJ. So the first function, like I said, of ESFJ's extrovert feeling. Like I said, Barbie's like, hey Barbie to everyone. To be fair, every Barbie's doing that, but let's just not focus on the other Barbies. So she's doing that a lot. And also, my description of ESFJ you can find in the link in the website down below. And I'm also going to read out my purpose role for ESFJ. So this is also what made me think ESFJ like right off the bat. My purpose role for ESFJ, to quote myself, is the host. The idea is that the host for ESFJ is not that new, but for me, it's really in terms of what is the purpose of the type? Like, what is the type meant to do? Why is it here on this earth? So just to quote myself, the purpose role for my website, the host is in their natural element when they gather, organize, and host situations related to people, ensuring their livelihood, enjoyment, and physical well-being, and of everyone included, by employing emotional vibrancy and a caring touch. Yeah, I think this is really, really Barbie in this movie.
If you have anything big planned, just a giant blowout party with all the Barbies and planned choreography and a bespoke song, you should stop by.
So there's also a scene rather early on where Barbie's like hosting a huge party at her place and inviting everyone, and it seems like it's almost daily occurrence that she's hosting those huge parties at her place, and that's like her main thing. Like, she's not really doing anything else, she's just living her life and hosting huge parties, and she is taking care of herself, obviously. If you are the FE subtype, you are a quote-unquote classic extrovert, meaning on the continuum of extroversion, introversion, you are very much an extrovert. Your outlook is extroverted. Typically also your energy levels will be stereotypically extroverted. And she's very clearly using a lot of FE. This is like her main thing in the movie as well, that it's all about her FE use, interestingly enough. And I guess, spoiler alert, during the movie she starts experiencing like the full range of human emotion. And the interesting thing is, this is more of a socionics thing, by the way. ESFJs, this is from Golenko's plus-minus theory, ESFJs have plus FE, which means they tend to focus more on positive feeling. And this is really the case with Barbie as well. Like, she's really much all about positive emotions. And once she starts experiencing negative emotions, that's like a big deal for her. But yeah, so she's basically, it's all about her exploring emotions. She's a very emotionally guided being. Maybe not human being right away. Once she starts going to the weird Barbie, which by the way I think is probably ENFP or ENTP, the weird Barbie tells her to go out into the real world and find the human who's playing with her, because the human's emotions are influencing her own emotions too much. And that's actually an unhealthy manifestation of having very strong FE. This is something that can happen to everyone, but this is especially something that extroverted feeling people struggle with. People who have extroverted feeling as the first or second function and who are a bit unhealthy, that they become like those sponges of other people's emotions, and it really impacts and influences their own emotions to the point where they find it hard to distinguish what are my emotions and what are their emotions. So this is basically what's happening to Barbie, where the human's emotions impact her too much, where she's starting to be like that person. So then she has to find that person, and the key way how she finds the person is by having visceral memories. Introverted sensing, I know that in the standard MBTI is usually described as like having a good memory or being very much past focused. And there can sometimes be a few issues with this. Like, SI is not necessarily always having the best memory. It's more like that sensory things have a very particular impression on you. You are basically introverting the sensorial impressions of the world, and that does often manifest in very visceral memories. And in the case for Barbie, that's the thing where she is able to recognize the person she's looking for through her memories, through her visceral memories of that person playing with her as a toy and things like that. So she has like snapshots of it. To be fair, those snapshots, however, are not perfect because there's like a slight mistake in terms of focus, and that could perhaps be attributed to the fact that introvert sensing is her second function rather than her main function or her first function. The second function, especially if it's a bit weakened due to the subtype, is sometimes a bit like an on-off function. Sometimes has a bit of an on-off quality where it's not always totally on, simply because the first function is on top of it, right? So because extroverts, especially if they have an extrovert subtype, are very much not inclined towards the introverted function. So it takes a bit of extra effort for them to introject, to introspect. It's the reverse for introverts. For them, it's harder to push themselves to be extroverted. I think every introvert will know this. And also I want to say, I'm not a fan of the whole that all SI users, SJs in MBTI are like traditional and that they're all, just clinging on to the old ways. There is a certain component to it because they do have this very, very visceral experience towards sensing, but they can be liberals. They're not always conservative. I think this is like the carryover from older generations, basically. I think when MBTI came about, it was the generation of those people, their parents, who were very traditional, very conservative, very much all about the rules or what is safe due to their experiences with wars and things like that. So I think that influenced the descriptions of SJs a lot. So yeah, I think Barbie is a good example of a modern ESFJ. So where it's not all about just like clinging on to the past, though she does have a tendency towards wanting to stick with what she already knows. There is a certain quality to that with introvert sensing, because when something is more familiar to you, it's often safer for the body. It's just, yeah, right? Like it's just often safer, and sensing, it does have a physical component to it. So from that perspective, I get it, but yeah. Anyway, the tertiary function in MBTI for ESFJ is Extroverted Intuition, and it's the function that ESFJ is not necessarily that good at, actually. It depends. If you have the FE subtype, like Barbie in this one, it can be a little bit boosted, but technically it just means that ESFJ cares about extroverted intuition. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be good at it. They tend to be like average-ish at it. So the ways how that shows up, it's not super clear. I would say the way how it shows up for Barbie is when she starts having these random thoughts about like, oh, what is death? Do you ever think about death? You know? And I think some people might misattribute it to introverted intuition. Sometimes extroverted intuition and introverted intuition can seem very similar, simply because they're both intuition. By the way, this is another spoiler alert. Towards the very end of the movie, she starts telling the creator of Barbie that she doesn't want to be just an idea anymore, but she wants to be someone who is creating the ideas. And that's very much a tertiary extroverted intuition thing. It's very much what we in socionics say the mobilizing function, meaning that the mobilizing function is often like the function that inspires you, or that you get inspired by, that influences you in your thinking. And for ESFJ, it is extrovert intuition. They get really inspired into creation with extrovert intuition. In this case, Barbie, instead of just being an idea of a woman, she wants to become a woman who has ideas. So I think that was a very interesting little thing for ESFJ Barbie here. The quote-unquote crazy or weird or rare Barbie in this world, I would say, is extrovert intuition lead. And this one is the Barbie who's like the most wacky, has a disconnection from physicality as well. Like intuitive types have a bit of a disconnect from physicality. By the way, not due to trauma necessarily. Some people sometimes have trauma responses where they find it hard to connect to their bodies. That's not always an intuition thing. So you have to kind of distinguish. Once you are not traumatized in the sense anymore, do you still have just a natural detachment, let's say, from the physical world? And this Barbie is always in the splits, right? And this is so weird for all of them. And yeah, the Barbie is just disconnected from that, and it's very much a mental kind of being, the weird Barbie. And this is also the Barbie who's like the most ingenious, has like makes interesting connections. It's the only Barbie basically that has the concept and the idea and the conceptualization of the fact that there are two worlds, the Barbie world and the real world. No other Barbie knows about this, and this is the only Barbie that knows, and the only Barbie that can lay it out to the main character. So I think that was a really interesting way how they depicted an extroverted intuition first person. Also extroverted intuition, because it doesn't really care as much about extroverted sensing. They have a disconnect, like I said. They don't value it as well. So this Barbie is also very disheveled. It looks kind of crazy, right? And this kind of is interesting. I would say more likely ENFP, but some might argue there are some aspects that could even seem ENTP in this one. Yeah, ESFJ and ENFP, they are not the best pairing, but they are better than the other pairing I'm going to talk about, which is Barbie and Ken. So at the very last point, introverted thinking, ESFJ, introverted thinking is generally, especially with the FE subtype, the weakest function. It's not very pronounced in this characterization. It's very much in the background, but yeah, it does play a role. She has that desire way more than Ken, by the way, which is interesting because Ken's type, I think he doesn't value introverted thinking. Basically why I think Ken is ESFP, it became rather clear to me that Ken was also an extrovert. He was also sensing rather. And it became also clear when I compared it to my type description and the purpose role of ESFP. Especially if you've seen Ken's music video, where he's basically a performer. And this music video, it happens rather towards the end of the movie when he's starting to discover what he wants. So yeah, the performer is in their natural element when they are able to perform tasks that suit their personal values and are aimed at improving interpersonal bonds, include movement and emotionally engaged interactions in a fast-paced environment, and also play out in the social world, aka in front of people. So this is basically Ken in this movie. This is his purpose in this movie. So that's just him. And he discovers that later on towards the end of the movie. So ESFP's first function is extroverted sensing. Ken is rather physical. He is also, his main task is being at the beach and doing stuff at the beach. And the funny thing is they don't really specify what exactly he is doing at the beach. He is just the beach guy. But he's not just hanging out at the beach, he is being active at the beach. When there's like a huge wave in the water and no one else dares to go in, and he's the only one who goes in, he has an accident. But yeah, I think that was a good example actually of extrovert sensing. People also sometimes think that just because something is your first function that you have to be like a pro at it, or you have to be like naturally super talented at it. And just because you have extrovert sensing first, does not necessarily mean that you're going to be like a professional surfer. I would probably bet that a lot of professional surfers have extrovert sensing first or second, but that is in addition to a lot of training and I guess perhaps even some naturally genetic physical attributes. So just because, let's say, you are an ESFP doesn't mean you are like a super sports person or something, or you don't have to be super athletic. But I mean, in Ken's case, it does apply, and it's also just the focus on the sensorial world, the focus on the external world. And extrovert sensing also tends to be, especially when they are male, they tend to be more hands-on, like more involved, more active, more yeah, just engaged. It's hard to describe, but yeah, like I said, Ken's example is really good. He just goes into the water, no one else dares, and yeah, even though he has an accident, but yeah, it's just the fact he was doing that is quite extrovert sensing-ish. Throughout the movie, a lot of it is how he personally feels. Like he is also led by his ethics, you could say. Not saying that his ethics are great or like objectively good, but he is led by how he feels. He's led by how he feels towards Barbie and how he feels people are treating him, whether they're treating him with respect or not. He just picks up on these things and he internalizes them a lot, which is more introverted feeling based. With Barbie, where it's all more externalized, where it's all more about what other people are feeling and trying to see how she fits in with that, and sometimes the lines are a bit blurry. With introverted feeling, it's much more, okay, this is how she feels about me, this is how I feel about her. Okay, what does it mean for me? What are my personal feelings about that? And how that influences you and your path. So a lot of Ken's also negative traits go into here. His introverted feeling, I would say, is rather unhealthy, and it's actually not always super developed either, which is kind of ironic. But I think it's because he's also an extrovert, so he doesn't always go into it in the best way. He does eventually realize what his real identity is. He kept tying his identity to Barbie, which I think is also due to his insecure attachment style, which is like a whole other issue. His edge, or what he is supposed to learn, is to use introverted feeling from like a more healthy perspective, and that is to be himself, to be authentic. And some ESFPs, I mean, a lot of them can actually struggle with that. Just because you have introverted feeling doesn't mean that you're always going to be authentic. ESFPs, also ENFPs sometimes, they can struggle with that a lot because they are so focused on the extrovert world. Ken also goes into the real world, and this is where more of the extrovert thinking part comes in the third spot. Like I said, the function that inspires you. So with ESFP, with Ken, it is when he starts learning all the facts and the logical structures in the world. So in this case, it is the patriarchy, and he's learning about, he's like reading books about the patriarchy, what it means to be a man, all this logic, all this logical information, you could say, that you can find in the external world. That is more TE based. So he soaks it all in. It also goes more into like, it's like a mix of SE and TE, where it goes more to like hierarchies, and he sees like the hierarchies at work and what it takes. He learns what it takes to get certain jobs. He starts going on a job hunt and trying to get all kinds of prestigious jobs. And this way it goes into T, where he's like learning about, oh, okay, you need to have this kind of degree, or you need to have this kind of training, and all these kinds of things. This is, I would say, the extrovert thinking inspiring his behavior, because, spoiler alert, he goes back to Barbie land and then tries to infiltrate the land. And also, this is also where it goes into extrovert sensing as well. Extrovert sensing can also be very pushy and want to have control and want to be at the top of things. So he accomplishes that, and he just takes over things. He just takes over Barbie's house. He just makes the entire world about Ken land, or something like that. And this is all inspired by what he learned, the patriarchy, and how it works in the world. So that's more the extrovert thinking, the facts about the world, and then him implementing that into his own world. And last is Introverted Intuition for Ken. I have to say that's not really that clear in the movie. It's not really a big thing in it. It's very hard for me to find like hints of the Introverted Intuition. By the way, like I said before, it is actually the weakest function for ESFP, or one of the weakest ones. Yeah, actually the weakest function for ESFP is introverted thinking, funny enough. And there's also a funny scene where Ken is like, oh, at first I thought that the patriarchy means that everything is about horses. So this was like a kind of weak TI moment there. Anyway, so yeah, that's the thing with Ken. And Barbie and Ken, they just clash. They just have no personality, like big connection or whatever. They just have superficial, the connection of extroversion, sensing, feeling, and that's about it. And it really nicely demonstrates how this intertype relation works as well. And ESFJ, ESFP, they, in terms of functional strengths, technically are identical. They are both extroverts, they're both sensors, they're both feelers, aka ethicals. So technically they have the same foundation in terms of personality strengths. And this is also why they are called quasi-identicals and socionics. So they are on one hand kind of identical in those strengths, but only quasi, because of course the functional order is different and also which functions they prefer is different. And you can also see how they are quasi-identicals in the way how Barbie doesn't need Ken. And that's the thing, you don't need your quasi-identical in your life. And I guess to some extent maybe you don't even need the identical in your life, though an identical can still provide way more compatibility in some other ways. At least they can support you and they have the same kind of functional values as you. Whereas with your quasi-identical, you can be kind of friendly acquaintances, but you don't need them in terms of strengths and you don't value the same things in life. So it's just like, yeah, whatever. And this is exactly actually the dynamic you can also find in the movie. I think Ken is just mostly driven by his attraction for Barbie. They don't really have a personality connection. So that's really interesting. It could just really be a physical thing for Ken in this case. He does find her valuable, but that's all it is. So that was interesting to see. If you want to know more about Enneagram types of Barbie and Ken, let me know. And yeah, see you next video. If you want me to type you, just go to my website, fill out the form you can find at the end of this page, and I see what I can do. And yeah, have a good day and see you next video. Bye!